Good evening, everyone. It's Christopher Hale here in Rutherford County in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. An honor to be with you here tonight on Monday night. I'm honored to be here with Rick Herron, who is the co-founder of Sunrise Movement Tennessee, Sunrise Movement Nashville, which is a organization that is dedicated to protecting creation, protecting the natural beauty of Tennessee, protecting our communities, our resources. And tonight I'm going to be joined with Rick, and Rick has an incredible background in politics and policy. He's a native of Tennessee. He graduated from Yale University, and then spent time. Actually, we coincided in Washington together. He spent time with a Christian organization called Sojourners, which is dedicated to public policy and Christian thought in Washington, D.C. He came back here, worked for Phil Bredesen in the 2018 campaign, and has now gotten involved in the environmental justice movement. But tonight we're going to talk simply about the origins, the biblical origins of protecting creation, why it's not some socialist left-wing agenda, but something actually deeply conservative and traditional and a profound part of our tradition as a country, a nation, and people of faith as well. So I'm going to bring on Rick. Rick, can you hear me? Hey, Rick. Rick, can you give me a little bit of introduction of yourself, your history, what you've done in this movement, and a little bit of background about who you are and how you got involved in environmental justice and protecting creation?
Definitely. So I really, it sounds cliche, or it. Not everybody has a tightly, a one story or one moment that comes to them where it's wrapped up tightly with a bow. But I really did kind of have a Damascus Road experience when it came to climate change and environmental justice. My parents were both, when I was younger, but my parents were both ordained in the Methodist Church and were both Methodist ministers, and sort of the one of the guiding, most important moral principles that I grew up with. One that I think can resonate with people of all faith, no faith, is captured in Matthew 25, which is really, Jesus instructs us and says, whatsoever you do unto the least of these, you do to me. And so I was never under the illusion that the environmental movement was just about the environment or about critters. It's always been about people. It started when, the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland catch fire. It started, with Silent Spring. It started with impacts both on creation and on people, on our health, on our cities, on our towns. But when I first saw An Inconvenient Truth, I sat in the back row of the theater. I remember being kind of stunned and listening to the Melissa Etheridge music play over the credits. And my family filed out, and everybody else filed out. And I was just thinking about all the different ways that what I'd just seen connected with Matthew 25, connected with this, moral imperative to care about the least of these. The folks who are going to hit hardest are the folks, are farmers, are the poorest among us, are refugees who are being forced out of their countries by megadroughts, by farmers whose crops are being hit hardest by droughts and extreme weather. By, my friend Annabelle, who's in Sunrise, her family forced from their homes. She had family members forced from their homes in California from wildfires. So this has everything to do, people and social justice. This has everything to do with how we treat the least of these, and it intersects with so many other important issues. And then, I got brought into the movement by a divinity student. He was a joint student between the divinity school and the environmental school, and he, organizing. I'd always been in politics, but organizing, building people power, building teams, and working towards common goals and making change is something I hadn't encountered before. And so I was transfixed by Sunrise's vision and goals and culture when they sort of broke out in 2018. End of 2018, I road tripped it with my best friend from Dresden up to one of their actions, and it was so inspiring to hear young people claiming their power. People our age and younger, Chris, who realize that they're going to get the worst of this, and realizing that, you know, we're done waiting and we're done with half measures, because James Hansen first talked to Congress about climate change before either you or I was born. And we've had 30 years of politicians not standing up to the people, politicians being cowed by corporations or bought off by fossil fuel companies. And we're ready to say enough. We're ready to say we need a Green Deal. We need a 10-year mobilization to re-gear our economy, build the clean energy economy of the future. And honestly, Chris, we needed that. We needed that before COVID-19, before this recession, before this, you know, economic crisis. That's the worst we've had since the Great Depression, and the original New Deal pulled us out of that. And so, if anything, the need for a New Deal, the need for economic stimulus that puts people to work, building that clean economy of the future, we need it more.
Well, it's interesting to me. I mean, what's so striking to me is that people will say, "Oh, Rick Herron's a radical leftist who is divorced from reality, divorced from the reality that our economy is facing, that the pressures of the marketplace, etc." But I mean, I've known you, Rick, for several years. You are not divorced from reality. You actually are steeped in both a Christian tradition, but also a pragmatic tradition. So let me ask you very simply: what is the cost of not acting? What if we don't do anything? What's going to happen to our beloved Tennessee? What's going to happen to this country if we don't act?
I mean, there's two parts to that. The cost is staggering. I mean, anybody who lived through the national for 2010 knows what the cost is. We're talking every study, every respectable study, every way. Everybody who studied this obviously has come to the obvious conclusion, you know, because the costs are so high, the way this would impact our economy, our farms, our coastal communities, our interior communities, every different way, from extreme weather to increase in infectious disease vectors, to, you know, stronger floods, longer droughts, more wildfires. There are all these costs to the climate crisis. And it's not only that those costs are so huge, is that the benefits of moving to a clean energy economy are so huge. Even if you're just looking at the cost, it's a no-brainer. When you look at the benefits of what we're talking about, when you're looking about the economic revitalization, when you're talking about building the clean energy economy in Middle and West and East Tennessee, I mean, heck, Chris, I mean, you've got a bunch of higher educational institutions in your district. You've got Smyrna, right? You got the Nissan plant that's building the best, you know, all electric car for consumers in the country right now. You've got farmers who we could change our policies for farmers so they're actually not punished for what they're doing, but they're economically and we're taking care of the environment. We can incentivize that instead of incentivizing environmentally in practices that don't heed our impact on the environment. We could pay farmers to sequester carbon in the soil, which has benefits as well in terms of reducing runoff and pest control and so many other ways that it benefits farmers, so helps stop the climate crisis. There are positives. It's not just the terrible cost that you and I are going to pay, people are paying now, but also you and I are going to pay in full. But the benefits of a clean energy economy with jobs that pay a living wage, help us protect the environment, regenerative agriculture, with higher education institutions that are training our young Tennesseans for the jobs of the future, that are innovating in clean energy technology and manufacturing. I mean, it's a no-brainer when you put together the cost of inaction and the benefits of action. Chris, am I still with you?
Well, one thing I was wanting to say to you, Rick, and bring you back is I think if we think really deeply about the particular affects of climate change, but also you talked about the terms of investment for our communities. And I'm from one of the most rural and ruby red districts in this country. But if we address, as you said, address climate change, we can fuel the economy of tomorrow. Can you talk in particular, Rick, about rural America, about rural communities? What would a Green New Deal? I call it a green square deal. We can have the Green New Deal. What will be aspects be on the rural economy? Everyone talks about this as like an urban idea, but I think we forget about the aspects, particularly in agriculture and in rural economies as well. What can I imagine when a Green New Deal would happen in the 4th Congressional District of Tennessee?
Absolutely. Yeah, for a long time, we have who's respectfully one party whose voters understand more and more the threat of climate change, but whose elected officials still deny the problem. And then we have another party, the Democratic Party, which I've been a part of since I was born on primary day, August 2nd, 1990. But for years, especially the last 10 years, has not taken it seriously either. We've gotten rhetoric, or we've gotten half measures. They hadn't really talked about it or proposed anything that's on the scale of the challenge. And so, but when we talk about what we mean for the 4th district, again, we're talking about not just like Swanee, MTSU, but technical community colleges, folks getting trained, to be involved in building solar panels, building wind turbines. There's plenty of potential all over the state of Tennessee moving towards renewable energy. We're talking about if a bunch of jobs are being created at, Smyrna plant from the Leaf all electric car, what is it going to be, when we have to really decarbonize, take all the pollution out of our transportation sector? That's going to mean public transit, which hopefully, they talk about Amtrak going down to Chattanooga. So that means, regional light rail and public transit, which, would come through our area. But it also means, where we can't reduce vehicle miles, where we can't reduce car trips, we have to have electrified vehicles that run on clean energy. And so that right there, Smyrna is the number one case study. And, and if we don't even have real climate policy right now, so imagine how many jobs are on the table when we really started taking this thing seriously and incentivizing, and building education and incentives for people to scale the Smyrna plant, way up even higher when those becomes the jobs of the future. The biggest, our biggest need for jobs, and especially with agriculture. I guess what I was saying, the Democrats who've tried to take this seriously, people think it's just about electricity. And going to clean electricity is a really important part of the challenge, and it's something that we really need to do in Tennessee, and that we're well poised to do in Tennessee. But it's about all the other sectors of our economy too, and especially agriculture. People leave agriculture out of the discussion, but it is, something like 20. People crunch the numbers differently, but it's something like 20% of our greenhouse gas emissions. And there are so many ways that farmers not only can help reduce our carbon pollution, can actually sequester carbon in the soil, take it out of the atmosphere so it's not polluting the atmosphere, but also these related practices that really make our food system, our agriculture system, their farms more resilient in general, which is going to be important, in adapting to climate change. So agriculture is core to solving climate crisis, empowering farmers to bring these solutions to bear.
Well, and what's so remarkable about it is it provides to me. We have a governor who ran on the fact of maintaining the rural way of life. That was his mantra. And what's remarkable to me is to retain the rural way of life. You're gonna have to embrace the future. Like, if we're going to maintain rural Tennessee, we have to address the reality of climate change. We have to address the reality of switching to renewable energy, switching to new industries, green industries. It's not just simply a question of moral rectitude and being right and being on the right side of these moral questions. It really is the pathway for protecting all these quote unquote conservative values that we truly do value. We do value the rural way of life, but there's no other way of imagining it unless we address this head on. So what's so strange about it is the Green New Deal is oftentimes seen as like a urban reality, but it's about protecting our way of life in so many aspects. Is it weird to you, Rick, that that rural America is not first and foremost in this conversation? Is it left behind too often when we're talking about environmental justice issues, renewable energy, et cetera, et cetera?
Absolutely, Chris. Although I think there are people that are working really hard to change that, and especially, with respect to, there are folks within the Sunrise Movement, the youth-led group that I'm a part of, and their allies, who are working really hard to rectify that. First of all, the Green New Deal resolution itself talks about rural economies and talks about agriculture, regenerative agriculture, and explicitly talks about benefit of the rural economy. But furthermore, there are a number of different groups that are writing policy proposals and are organizing networks. There's a network called Farmers and Ranchers for the Green New Deal that I would suggest folks look up. And so they're working really hard. There are folks who are working really hard to make sure that rural America is not left out of this conversation. That's honestly, that's a priority of the Sunrise Movement, and we are organizing all over the country, including in rural areas. And so I think our folks understand that, and we're trying to make sure that's not left out. The other thing I would say is that while we have to say that there are a lot of when we talk about environmental justice, really been primarily born. We think of it as exclusively an urban concern, and honestly, probably when we're talking about toxic air pollution and toxic pollution and impacts from being located next to coal plants, probably proportionally is, and urban areas probably do get hit worse, and especially communities of color. But really, the more I've been talking to candidates this cycle, who they live out, they're talking about landfills in Rutherford County. They're talking about all these toxic dumps that get put out in rural areas too, and that's an environmental justice issue. And they're not going to put it in the middle of the city. They're not going to put it where the rich folks live. They're going to put it out where we live. Actually, one of our, and so one of our leading Sunrise members, who's running for state rep in Indiana, when he moved back, the first thing he did was help organize against a Superfund, like a mega site that was going to try to come in and outside of South Bend, where the rural folks were. So environmental justice also affects rural communities, and the Green New Deal also has benefits for rural communities, and we're trying really hard not to make sure that's not left out of the conversation, because it hasn't been now, but Sunrise is hard to rectify that.
Rick, I have a question. It's come in through social media. I'm going to direct this to you. The question is, hold up, let me pull it up here. This is directly for Rick. Rick, can you talk more about your ideas that there is a Christian claim to take care of the environment? Christian claim, can you talk about the Bible and where the Bible talks about taking care of creation? That's a good question.
Absolutely. We talk about this a lot, I think if I start trying to sound like a seminarian or a pastor or like you, Chris, I'm going to be out over my skis pretty quickly, but I do know.
Because he's a rank and file Christian.
Yeah, I think, in the Old Testament, we see all these calls for justice, which intersect with the environment and climate change, because it's about people. It's about taking care of the least of these. It's taking care of all of us, but it's about taking care of the widow, the sojourner, the orphan, and the poor. And we have, all sorts of Old Testament prophets who talk about that, and those are going to be the folks that are hit worse by this. But also, in terms of taking care of creation, often in Genesis, in the creation narrative, there's been this enduring mistranslation or misunderstanding of where the word it's translated as dominion. We shall have dominion over the earth. And in modern English, that has a sort of a negative connotation, like we're going to subjugate it or, put our foot on it or something. But really, dominion, if you look at, in the original, what the word really means is right rule and stewardship.
Right. Right. We're in a correct relationship with each other. It's not about control or power. We are in relationship. We belong to each other in some capacity.
Yeah, exactly. Anybody's ever farmed or gone outdoors or really just lived in the rural area knows, we see our connection to the land all around us. We're not separate from it. We know that. And so it's God's creation, but it's absolutely about all of us, and about the leads, and about, we talk about loving your neighbor as yourself. And with climate change, you're my neighbor, Chris. My neighbor next door on Meadow Lawn Drive is my neighbor. And the carbon pollution is global. My neighbor lives across the world from me too. And what we do in the United States is going to impact those folks as well. So we are called to love our neighbors in a way. We have to really rise to that call.
And what you're referring to, of course, is in the gospel. Jesus asks that profound question, "Who is your neighbor?" And he proposes that the neighbor is not just, as you said, right next door to here, me in Rutherford County, but Popes and Davidson County, Fentress County, all across the state, from Mountain City, Memphis, and across the nation of the globe. Rick, and this is a really good question. I got two really good questions. You brought in a good crowd tonight. Skylar asked, what role do you think the TVA can play in a Green New Deal? I love that question. Do you have any thoughts on that? What role the TVA itself can play in a Green New Deal?
Absolutely. That's one thing. I'd be happy to send you more, Chris, but we should definitely talk more. But really we've been working with a coalition of groups that had a bunch of listening sections last year about energy democracy, because the truth is the TVA has an amazing legacy. It electrified the whole South. It brought us out of poverty in a big way. It was made a huge contribution to that. But since then, the institution has faded and degraded, and now, honestly, it's pretty out of touch and monolithic and top down and not very impenetrable, and also not concerned enough about moving to clean energy. They've got like the tap where they are now, but they don't have any plan to get to 100% clean energy in anything like the time we need to. And so I think, reforming TVA is up to Congress. And so I think that would be something you'd have to address where you elected. But I think, basically reforming the way TVA is governed, and also basically you can do that in a lot of ways, but especially having a mandate around easing energy burdens on folks. It's often the poorest folks that pay the highest proportion of their income on energy. And the TVA not only has goals that are woefully inadequate about moving to renewable energy, they've also scaled back a lot of their incentives for solar energy, for energy efficiency, and that's stuff that not only, is the climate, but saves people money. So there's honestly, both in the way that TVA treats the climate crisis and the way that they're governed, there's a lot of reform that needs to happen.
Well, I think your former boss, and I actually feel like Phil Bredesen stole this idea from me, but we'll give him credit because he went way further than I did. He talked about using the TVA as a means for broadband. I know that's a really good idea. The idea that we use the infrastructure that lit up our skies, that cut poverty in the South by half, and created incredible amounts of jobs. I think it's this way of reimagining that infrastructure for, I think that for the 21st century, rural broadband is equivalent to electricity. We need broadband to look. Our kids are going to school right now through remote, and me running for Congress, I've had plenty of technical difficulties, both user based, but also because of the fact that we have bad internet. And so I think there's ways that we can reimagine the TVA to meet present realities, like it did in the 20th century. It was remarkable to me that Donald Trump doesn't get a lot of things right, but he was right that that it's absurd how much the CEO of the TVA makes, his salary. And then Lamar Alexander, in his last year as distinguished senior senator from the United States from state Tennessee, says, you know what, the one time I'm going to go to bat for President Trump or go bat against him, I'm going to write a op-ed in the Knoxville News Sentinel defending his 7-figure salary. I think it's absurd. I have one more question for you, Rick, and then we'll go to the close. There's two. Let me see. One I think is going to go. I'm going to go with one more than the other. Vicky asks, essentially, I'm going to paraphrase her question. How do we start making the argument to folks who say climate change is a hoax? And I want you to go first, but I also want to respond to that question. But Rick, what is Rick Herron method for engaging folks who thinks it's a total fraud? It's not a real thing. It's a Chinese hoax.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to, number one, pick your battles. Is this a Facebook friend you don't know that well is real interested in their views, or is this somebody in your family at Thanksgiving? That's the first consideration. The second thing, is to be respectful. And the third thing really is to, I'm not saying don't, but the vast majority of Americans understand the simple science that this is not only this is real and this is a huge problem and we can fix it. Like, vast majority of America. And so really, for action to happen, what we need that 65, 70+% of Americans who understand this to be mobilized, to get out in the streets, to vote, to demand action from their representatives. And if we can mobilize the folks who are already with us, we can solve this. And so I think that's really where I'm not poo-pooing the idea of dialogue or talking with folks. It's a person-by-person decision, but really our job is to, for everybody who already knows and cares about this, to get everybody mobilized. And that's what Sunrise Movement, we're trying to build a movement big enough to stop the climate crisis and create millions of good jobs in the process. And Chris, I do have to go talk more offline, but I got to ask you in this discussion, some more, but would you be willing to add, I'm calling from Dresden, so when I have to upload something for work, I have to go to McDonald's because the Wi-Fi is too slow. The Wi-Fi guys have been kind to us, but ask if you'd be willing to, one, sign the Green New Deal pledge that Sunrise has, and two, if you'd be willing to consider adding clean energy reforms and TVA governance reforms to your TVA platform.
Yes, I'm all in on both. I want to say yes, I'll sign the pledge, and two, I will sign the pledge for TVA reform. But third, I want to offer I would say a ask of you too. It's been really frustrating to me. I think that we need rural messengers on the Green New Deal, and I want to be a rural messenger. I think I might be the only person. Maybe, I'm not sure about this. I think it's very likely that I'll be the only nominee, and I haven't won the nomination yet. But in August, that I'll be the only nominee running for Congress in the rural South who says yes to that. But I'm doing so because I believe in it. But I'm also doing so in a hope that we can start talking more about the effects of climate change and protecting creation on rural America, and that we can start being better communicators on this. Yes, there needs to be, some communicators that are particularly coastal and urban, but we need rural communicators on it as well. And so I want to bring together, and I would love for you to be a part of this, Rick, and I would love to work with you on this. I want to talk about ways of reframing and re-arguing the Green New Deal to rural America. And I think that I want to be a leader on that. I don't pretend to be a policy expert at all on this, but I do understand the moral framework as a Christian, but also to the economic framework as run for the United States Congress in one of the most red and rural areas of this country. So I'm all in on both. Put my name to the paper, but I know that I would hope to work with you on figuring out a way to talk about these issues and to list up the particular aspects of climate change and protecting creation that are first and foremost felt in rural America, and making sure that rural America's voices are heard on this.
Absolutely, we'd love to continue that conversation, Chris. Very much look forward to it.
Rick, I appreciate it. I'm over time, so I need to let you go, but I hope you hold my feet to the fire. And if God willing, I take the oath of office on the 5th of January, 2021. I hope you're there, and then I hope you yell at me, in a good way. I want to be challenged to hold up to the ideals. For you and I as Christians, it's not just ideals of policy, but of moral culpability that the Bible tells us about, of taking care of God's creation. So thank you, Rick. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks so much for everyone.
Thank you. That was Rick Herron, folks, and Rick is an incredible champion of the rural communities of rural America, of addressing creation and protecting God's creation in rural America. He's going to challenge me, and he puts forward something that I think is really important to understand, that for you to understand, Mr. and Mrs. Viewer, about the challenges we face. So many of the Republican policies, the Republican way of life, the Republican worldview hurts us first. It hurts you and I in suburban and rural America first. However, of course, they run unopposed down here. I'm a Democrat who's unafraid to be a Democrat. I'm a Democrat who's unafraid to call out the hypocrisy of politicians who hold up the Bible in one hand and denigrate everything it stands for in the other hand. I'll be honest with you, to win this election, we cannot just simply hold hands and sing Kumbaya. We have to talk clearly about what's at stake and the distinctions between me and Scott Desjardins. So let's put it very clearly. Scott Desjardins is a champion of those guys in silk suits who ride their limousines to work. I am a champion of those who drive themselves to work and take a shower when they get home. They are going to be the first victims of the environmental degradation. They're going to be the first victims of rising prices. They're going to be the first victims of agriculture failing. I'm fighting for those women and men across Tennessee. My opponent fights for their bosses. I'm fighting for you and your family. In the last 48 hours, nearly 1,500 people from across this country, from across this state, have contributed to our campaign. We have run the best grassroots, we have the best 24 hours of grassroots fundraising this state has ever seen. Let me tell you something. There was not one campaign for United States Congress or United States Senate in this country yesterday that received more donations than this campaign. It's because we're speaking the truth. It's because when they go low, we're actually punching harder and telling the truth and punching hard for our people and our values. So I need you in this election. I need your support. I'm asking for you to get involved right away. Right away, I need you. Go to ChristopherHale.com. Sign up to be a part of our campaign. Join the 1,500 people this weekend who joined our campaign and gave a contribution. The best thing you can do is if you can only give a little bit, thank God. Please do, and give it monthly. That sustaining revenue makes it possible for us to create the campaign and the movement that's going to win this election and bring generational change to Tennessee and America. If you're with us, we want your neighbors to know you're with us. You can go to ChristopherHale.com/Hale yes. That's HALE yes, and get a sign. Show your neighbors that they're not alone in supporting us and that we're going to win this election. To every Tennessean who's struggling tonight, whether from this deadly virus, the inability to find work, a dim future, or a checkered past, I want you to know something. I'm with you. I'm going to fight like hell for you. We're going to win this election, and we're going to bring change to this country and to Tennessee and America. Have a good night. Thank you.